Hello and welcome to Season 3 of Beyond Borders. This is the space where we explore the harder questions, the ones that don't always fit in a headline. Each week we go deeper into the future of creativity, systems, technology and trust. Not just to make sense of where we're going, but to ask, what are we building and who are we becoming as we build it? Hello, I'm Carolyn and I'm here with Pim and Sprenko for episode 6 of season 3 of Beyond Borders. And today we're slowing things down a little to talk about something that rarely makes the headlines, but often changes everything. This episode is called The Power of Kindness, Quiet Acts, Lasting Impact. And for me, it was inspired by a moment that took me completely by surprise recently. A developer gifting me a domain and a website for trustedloops.com. No ask, no conditions, just care and belief. And it hit me that this wasn't about a domain. It wasn't about a thing at all. For me, as the receiver of this gift, this act of kindness, it was about being seen. So today we're asking, what power lies in uncelebrated generosity? How does kindness shape the long game? And in a world driven by metrics and performance, where does kindness go when nobody's watching? So, Sprenko, Pim, let's begin with the basics here. We often think about kindness as being soft, personal, something nice to have. But what if it's actually radical? What if it's one of the most disruptive forces we have, precisely because it bypasses power structures, resists extraction, and builds trust in ways that metrics can't track? Let's think about that for a minute. Pim, I'm going to come to you first. How do you define kindness in your life? Is it something you actively move toward deliberately, or does it just show up? And do you think that kindness is undervalued in how we talk about impact?
Well, I always got educated by my parents that kindness is the way to go, also by grandparents within the family. And I also agree on it that because it is the way to make relationships work, not only in business, but just in general. We be kind, listen, ask questions, help when they need it, receive help when needed. Uh, it is also more enjoyable. Otherwise, you get the Scrooge idea during Christmas, which isn't the best. And yeah, so is kindness is the way it goes. And what is kindness? As I said, just be respectful, listen. With new people, let's say you meet new people, try to help, even if it's a small thing like opening the door, holding the door. I'm tall, so I will probably help someone in the supermarket. All those little things are a form of kindness that actually could help somebody during the day, but also helps your mood during your own day. So I think it's a big importance if you want to be yeah, self-sustainable in the sense of energy against depressions. Being kind makes you more happy. So I think that's the most
Mm.
powerful thing when it comes to kindness. And of course, other relations that happen with kindness and stay with kindness, which is important, bring you more happiness. So I think that's the most powerful thing of being kind in general.
I think, you've touched on something super important. It's relational, isn't it? It's felt by both the giver of kindness and the receiver. And I think we forget sometimes how powerful it is. If we go through life just being kind because of our upbringing, as you described, that's in you, it's who you are and how you engage with the world. But we can also choose to offer kindness and acts of kindness, can't we? In maybe situations that wouldn't normally, find kindness. Where I'm going with that is, I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in a situation, maybe in a heated discussion where, there's anger bubbling to the surface or diverse or opinions, where people are disagreeing. If you interject in those situations with kindness, it destabilizes the whole thing. I don't know if you've ever done it, but it really does destabilize because no one's expecting it. Tension and emotions are high, and if someone comes in with kindness in whatever way, asking for everybody to, see each other's point of view or whatever, I can't think of the words exactly at the minute, but it just changes the whole dynamic. And I was thinking about this as I put together, what we were going to talk about today. Because as I said in the intro, it became very real for me a few weeks ago when that developer stepped in quietly and give me Trusted Loop's domain and website. He legitimized something that had until then only existed in spirit, in my belief. And he did it without fanfare. So that's kind of what I mean when I talk about kindness as a design principle, not reactive, it's relational, it's not always visible, but it builds the infrastructure of trust. So that brings me nicely to Sprenko. Sprenko, how do you see kindness shaping the way we show up in community, especially maybe in Web3 or in your own spaces? Well, how do you feel and work with kindness?
This is a very lovely conversation. I'm happy to be here, Carolyn. Is one I embrace wholeheartedly. Something that in my core communities thrives, and I'm happy about that because, like you rightly said, you may be brought up with kindness, you may be surrounded by kindness, but if you do not practice, if you don't offer it, if you don't immerse yourself in acts of kindness, experiences, situations, circumstances that will require you to say, I need to stretch out an arm of kindness here. It almost, you know, alienates you from the experience of it. So
Mm,
in my community, for example, the Real Talk Hub, several times, several instances, extended large to the community or, behind the scenes, community member to community member, somebody just slides in the other person's DM. I saw that tweet you made. How can I help? Things like that. It's been very practical, not once, not twice, repeatedly. And it just, reminds me that even in chaos, a little drop of calm can just stable everything like you shared, it doesn't even have to be in disagreements or heated arguments where there's anger bubbling to the surface. It could be in situations where the logical thing to do would be to mind your business and look away. It
mm,
doesn't concern you directly, it doesn't affect you directly, but no, you just see someone just shoot up somewhere, drop a little bomb of kindness. I'm using the word bomb because it changes the whole
exactly.
atmosphere, and just I love it. And I appreciate when people, regardless of where they find themselves, carry, the basket of kindness along with everywhere they go. It's just really beautiful.
I do, and you certainly do, and Pim as well. I know, and one of the things that I'm going to highlight it here, and I apologize if this is embarrassing for you, Sprinkle, but I always remember, the early days of Web3 for me, and you messaging me in the DMs and calling me a bundle of awesomeness. And
Yeah.
and I don't know whether you realize the impact of that, but just that makes you smile, doesn't it? Somebody saying
Mm,
that, whether you feel it in your bones that you are a bundle
mm,
of awesomeness is another matter altogether. But somebody
mhm.
taking the time to come to your DMs and to say that to you makes you smile on a day maybe that you weren't feeling particularly smiley. And it is an act
Right.
of kindness. You didn't have to do that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Anytime it comes up, I'm like, hmm, why did I even do it? You know, the truth is sometimes you don't have to have a reason to help, to support, to, open the door for they don't have to be
100%.
beautiful, they don't have to be well dressed, they don't have to be well spoken, they don't have to be a human being. They don't have, just let
Yeah.
kindness thrive. So I really love it. Can't wait to explore more of this conversation.
Yeah, indeed. Let's stay with this a little longer because I think we live in a world of performance, don't we? Big launches, loud claims, but often the things that sustain us, actually sustain us, are quieter, a kind reply that, that's what we're talking about now. A
Mm.
DM that says, I saw you, or I see you. And some of the most important moments of my life as I reflect on this actually came from kindness I didn't even know I needed or how to ask for. And I think these, as invisible threads, I think of them holding everything together, whether or not we give them credit. And it applies to AI too. We talk about that a lot. But what if the most important thing AI can learn from us isn't speed or our logic, but how we show up from one another, for one another with kindness? So, Pim, I'm going to come to you first and ask, have you experienced an act of quiet generosity or kindness in your life that's changed your path along the way? Something that may not have come with noise, but changed the way you moved forward? And how do you think kindness plays out in leadership or collaboration?
Well, yes, because eventually kindness brought me to the sectors I'm currently in. As mentioned before, that I have I had to switch sectors because of health, and my eventually being chosen for an exhibition in Eindhoven is an act of kindness because somebody likes your art.
Hmm.
And with that, on the day itself, I'm still working with a couple of them that I met that day because we had kind conversations. We had not just conversation on the topic that we were supposed to talk about that day, but just in general, what do you do in life? Where do you live? How wife, kids, that kind of story, which is also an act of kindness, just being interested in someone. And also after I explained my art and how I made it, what it stands for, etc. The being kind after that in saying you did good, I like what you did, what do you do in general, just those small compliments when while you're starting in a certain sector you're not used to is very important for saying I'm going through with this. I'm contacting that person. I'm eventually trying to help that person with the business in some ways. It's just because that day or those hours, it can be even very time limited, it can be very short. They were kind to me, and also likewise, I hope, at least I hope they received it like that.
Yeah,
And
no,
that
I,
actually
I
built
understand. Go on, go on.
a relationship that now lasts for more than 2 years, almost three.
Wow.
And it started within a couple of hours of just a conversation and being kind to each other.
Hmm. It's how we build trust. What I'm hearing there from you, and I feel it myself, it's how we build trust with people, I think. It's that time and effort and meaning that we bring to situations that ends up with us feeling a sense of trust towards each other, I think. Sprinkle, same question to you, really. Have you experienced an act of kindness, quiet generosity in your life that changed your path or stuck with you, and how did that change how you moved forward?
Yeah, definitely. My life has not been without, subtle acts of kindness that really just either change my perspective as to how I viewed human beings or just, deepen my understanding with, you know, how to navigate life. I remember a time, growing up and, you know, I found myself in a very seriously dangerous spot at the time. And I didn't know what to do. And one of the people who could have contributed to, it becoming worse for me, actually just stepped out and said, you know what, let's, let him go. And it wasn't considered as an act of kindness in the moment because I'm like, I was just happy to be out of that situation. But, reflecting upon it, there was no particular reason as to why the individual did that, you know. There was
Mm,
no reason, it wasn't paid, nothing, it didn't know me before, but just that thought that, I could contribute to this person's peace rather than, their struggle or suffering or pain. And that for me just made me, it sort of deepened my understanding as to how to navigate life. Sometimes kindness is never about being fond of the person who's receiving it, who's going to receive it, liking them, knowing their background, or any exchange of value. Is simply just an act of kindness, just a subtle or quiet contribution to making life easier and better for another human being or another being. You know, a lot of times we think, you know, acts of kindness, are sort of like a down payment for future, help, something like that. No, you don't have to get anything out of being kind. You don't even have to get the compliment that, oh, thank you for being kind to me. You don't even need that to sow a seed of kindness.
mm. Yeah, I get you. I do. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about a challenging moment that the kindness wasn't immediately registered, and that's often the
Mm,
case, isn't it? It's only afterwards with reflection that you realize a different path could have led to a very different outcome, and that
hmm.
person made a decision in that time, and they may not have done it under the banner of conscious kindness, but it was certainly there nonetheless. Make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
some acts of kindness, you need a handout and someone just steps out and shows you, some love. Yeah, those could register as, oh my God, thank you so much. But there's certain things that, you do or have done to you, and in the moment it doesn't exactly register as an act of kindness. It could be, you know, well, that's what you're meant to do, or that's your job or whatever. But upon reflection, you realize that they could have done something differently. They could
Mm,
have
yeah.
chose not to even do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that really that as well as the gift from the developer, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast on this topic today. And I want to take us even deeper here because I think we're living in a world where kindness isn't always evident, especially on the world stage, I think, at the moment. So, what if we start as people, as individuals, to start looking at kindness as more than just a feeling, but as a kind of technology? Now, bear with me a minute. What I'm talking about here, a way of distributing emotional bandwidth, a mechanism for long-term sustainability as humans, as the connection that we have with each other, a quiet architecture that runs beneath everything of mutual respect. We talk a lot about AI, and we talked about it in the last episode of Beyond Borders. We talk about ethics, output, optimization, but we rarely ask what kind of presence are we teaching the AI. It knows an awful lot about us and our history and our data. But what are we teaching it in terms of programming kindness? Now, we can't do that. I don't believe that kindness as such can be programmed, but it can be mirrored. And in a world that optimizes for scale, kindness recalibrates us to care. And I think when we talk about technology and we talk about AI, it's kind of the bit that's missing, the care, the calibration for care. It's calibrated for success, for dominance, for growth, when I think there needs to be a little bit more kindness in amongst it all. So, Sprenko, to you then, how do you build kindness into your working rhythms and relationships, especially when you're feeling under pressure? And what does leadership rooted in kindness look like to you? Because leadership often is about strength. It's about displaying power. And, you would speak to many leaders and they wouldn't say particularly that they had kindness at the forefront of their mind when they're making their decisions. So how does that all shape up for you?
Yeah, that's a good one. As regards my working rhythms, kindness is something that, though not necessarily surrounded by growing up, experiences shape us. And when you expose to something like kindness, you embrace it wholeheartedly, and you have no reason not to extend it to the rest of the world, you know? So even when, things are not exactly how you want them to, when you're under pressure, there's, friction in relationships, sometimes you have to look inwards and ask yourself the difficult question, what am I here for? What am I getting out of it?
Mm.
Why am I concerned about my investment in this relationship, in this product, in this project, whatever it is, right? And then that answer to that question, in all of its authenticity, gives you a subtle reminder as to why you continue to be kind. You're not doing it because you want to get kindness back. It would be nice to, but that's not what's moving you to be kind. You're not extending a hand of support to a friend or family member or or a stranger simply because you want them to see you 10 years time and say, hey, that dude paid for my coffee. I'm going to pay for his gas. You're not doing it because of that. You're doing it because that's the courteous thing to do. You've received it. You know what it feels like to receive it. You want to contribute it to, you want to contribute to that chain. And secondly, what leadership looks like, when it's rooted in kindness, I would describe it with one word, reflection.
Mm.
When you see yourself in other people, when it's so easy for you to put your foot in other people's shoes, when you make every decision like you're the consumer, not just the project manager or the producer. When you ask yourself, if I were that employee, would I like my boss? Would I like the kind of boss I am to my employee? Things like that. It's in reflection. And I use that word because you don't have to look too far to see
Mm.
what it means to lead with kindness. You're not trying to boss people around. You're not trying to exert your opinions, your ideas on other people. It's simply about sharing, laying it out, giving your gift to the world, and letting whoever wants to accept it in right faith take it. And I believe leadership rooted in kindness excels without even trying so hard.
Mm. There's some interesting points there and powerful as well, Sprenko. Thank you for that. Pim, what about you as we head into the final reflections of this episode of Beyond Borders? What does leadership rooted in kindness look like to you? And do you see evidence of that in your life, leaders around you that lead with kindness?
Uh, well, never really looked at it that way, to be honest. But what I think leadership with kindness is that you're trying to make somebody else's day a little bit lighter instead of harder. I think not just on work floors, but just in general. I think that if we all do that together as a humanity's sake and make everybody's day, of trying to make everybody's day, when possible, of course, a little bit lighter or easier as an act of kindness, I think eventually leadership itself will change to that direction more often. In other episodes, we talked about having KPIs as a business. I think that does make being kind to some extent more difficult the
Mm.
moment you get closer to deadlines.
Yeah.
Because you will be the person who gets talked by an advisor and says, well, you didn't meet your KPIs. What are you going to do about it? And those conversations are less kind because there's money involved. And some say money is the great invention there is, but it is invented by the devil, which I always like. And it also comes with kindness. when there is money involved, kindness unfortunately might fall off a little bit. Same with leadership within government. There are so many demands that at some point, and so also so many strings that just pull on leadership, on directors, CEOs, or even in your all jobs, to be honest, that sometimes kindness just isn't, it has no room in your thoughts. I think if we can solve that, which probably won't be solved by AI, then leadership kindness will all come together in the longer term, and people will be more happy to go to work, will be more happy during the day, and all those kinds of things will be more normal. Are we there yet? Well, if you look on the internet and the news, we are getting more far away, but I'm not
Mm.
sure if that's the right place to research, because news articles, social media are in general the places where there's also a search for attention. And with kindness, there isn't a lot of intention when it comes to news articles or social media.
Yeah. Pim, I'm going to cycle back to something that you said there. You talked about pressure and KPIs, and you said, you're in front of somebody, the KPIs have been set, and you're telling that person you didn't achieve your goals. What are you going to do about it? And I was thinking about the language of that as I listened to you, and I was thinking, language plays a huge part in kindness. And in those kind of situations, as a leader, we can very simply soften the blow, if you like. And all right, I'm simplifying this. There are times when there needs to be, a sterner approach, perhaps. But what are we going to do about it? Or what can we do about it so that person feels supported instead of isolated? Sprenko, I'm going to bring you in there from a mental health point of view. What do you think of that, the use of language and kindness?
I think it's an interesting one. I think it's one that stands out. Maybe not too much of a big deal, but very, very impactful if used in the right situation. I feel like when we want to convey kindness, it is important that we understand the dynamic of the atmosphere in which we want to, extend, our kindness. So sometimes we go with a mindset that as long as the intention is to be kind, it doesn't matter how it's being presented. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
So
do.
I believe the language with which we approach kindness or present it, it matters, but may not be that much of a huge flag to wave to say, yeah, but it's something that matters regardless.
We can be mindful of that. Pim, do you want to come
Exactly.
back in on that?
Well, being mindful of kindness is the start to many good things. If you're not, if you actively think in a mindful way of I want to be kind to everyone, uh, people will be kind to you because you create a sort of a atmosphere around yourself. And then people will be more kind, people will open up more, you will easier be more kind in all situations. So being mindful is, I think, a very big first step.
Yeah, indeed. And that brings us to the final reflections for this episode of Beyond Borders. So, Sprenko, any final words for our audience?
I'd say whatever you do, see kindness as a normal way of life, not an act to put on, not a performance cloak to wear,
Mm,
not something to showcase, but one to live in.
I would agree with that. Pim, what about you?
Always be kind, definitely when you can. And yeah, I think Spranko mentioned the other part that is very important in general. And surround yourself with people who are kind to you and you are easily kind too. I think that also helps.
Fabulous. Thank you both for a marvelous episode. For me, kindness isn't just the extra, it's the thread. It's the one that binds, remembers, and quietly sustains us, even when, and maybe especially when, no one's keeping score. Thank you for being here with us today. If this episode resonates, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep creating, keep showing up, and keep choosing kindness, even when it's quiet.